All right. People should be able to see and hear us now. We're gonna do our typical thing of giving it a minute to make sure that
Yeah.
there's no audio issues. Um, okay, so we're coming
Yeah,
through.
people can see us.
Mhm.
Perfect. Uh, okay, now I need to mute myself. There we go. Okay. Um. All right. How many people do we have here right now? Well, it says there's three waiting still. Maybe I need to refresh the page.
There are 7 watching now.
Okay. Cool. I
Let's
think that's
check.
that's good enough for us to maybe just get started on the sort of round robin. People can update on what they're doing, and remember, this is uh, for folks watching, right? The core team is all has very time intensive day jobs, and so in a lot of cases, their update I think will just be what's going on with their lives, what they've been using, how which parts of Ash they've been using and how that sort of thing. It's not always not everybody is constantly building new and awesome features. It takes a lot of time, and this is a uh, long-term project that we want everybody to focus on their own lives for, of course. So I'll start, which is Ash 3.1. Between the last office hours and this office hours, Ash 3.1 was released and Igniter was launched. And Igniter been
Big deal.
yeah, big deal. Lots of buzz around Igniter.
It is.
Um, it's if you've seen any of it, basically it's our, or I guess if you haven't, I mean, it's a set of tooling for building like generators and new project generators and making patches to projects so that you can have like upgrade scripts or install scripts and this sort of thing. And it's the project is going really well. I think it's going to be really successful. There's still some small kinks that we're working out, but ultimately like the paradigm is proving itself. It works well. And I think we've done some of the basic ones, but we've actually got some pretty big plans for packages like Ash Authentication that are going to leverage this new tool set to, I think, reduce a lot of the user friction and kind of like maybe I would say even in a way sort of meet Mix Phoenix Gen Auth in the middle to some degree, because like Mix Phoenix Gen Auth is great. You generate it once and you can tweak any little thing that you want, but there's you pay a significant cost, which is that now you own all of that code. That's a liability in the same way. So it's just it's an interesting thing, but we think that we can cut a balance somewhere in there where we can generate the shell of the code that shows you what's happening. We can write the actions into your resources, and this is all. Maybe I should let James talk a little bit more about this because this is from his brain. So I'll tell you
No,
what.
you
You can talk about that when we get around to you. The project's not started yet, but it'll happen at some point in the future. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on, and on top of that, just a lot of things like 3.0 has had some bugs, and so we've got them. I think for the most part, the big ones are all worked out, but I spent the last couple of weeks really tackling that. Um, which is not fun, but it's great. The community's been really supportive and providing tests and things like that just to help us figure out like where's the problem, make sure we can reproduce it quickly and address it quickly. So that's a little round of applause to the community for helping out with that. So yeah, let me throw it over to James. You can talk about what you've been working on and maybe some about Ash Authentication.
well, I mean, I haven't really touched Ash Authentication because I've been pretty busy with client work. The big thing for me was finally getting the much requested map step working in Reactor, which required me to actually have a project to use it on to force me to do it. But that's how it goes sometimes, because it was not as easy as I had initially thought to make it work nicely because it creates some recursion inside the graph that needs to be addressed to make it work nicely. But now it does, and it keeps to the concurrency limits and everything, so it can be working on finishing one batch and working on the next batch simultaneously, and it's really awesome. Actually, I'm really pleased with it. Um, so that was a big thing. My next goal, because of said project, is to, and I'm thinking I might start it this weekend if I have time, start working on a rec extension for Reactor so that we can so that you can just make HTTP requests and build them, in a nice DSL way from inside Reactor, which will go a long way towards the promise of, like transaction-like semantics across systems, which we've pushed for Reactor. We've talked about a lot. For Ash authentication regarding Igniter, the plan, although I expect it'll be Zach that does the implementation, the plan is for it to take, for it to have at least have an option to take all the actions that it currently generates in the transformer inside the system, but you don't see in the code, and actually put them in the resource for you, because a lot of the times people don't realize what actions it's making and that are available to them. So it gives you the get by subject action and the the password reset action, and all these sorts of actions that are built in there. And if you introspect the resource, you can see them, but they're not in the code, so people don't realize that they're available to them. So that's the plan for that, is to make those actions visible. We also have talked about, but haven't really come up with a solution yet for how to eject the live views from Ash Authentication Phoenix into your app. That's a little bit different to code patching, I think. Maybe not. Maybe we just make sure it works with HEX nicely.
Yeah, it's
Zach's not freaking out at me saying that.
No. I think it, honestly, it kind of sucks, but I think what we're going to have to do is, we're gonna have to rework a lot of that more than we thought we would, which is basically like, I don't know. We're gonna have to provide simpler components that can be used and dropped in, and the question is, can we make sure that our views are composed of that, so that everything, like the ones that we provide by default are composed of that, so that it all just sort of works. It's not an easy task, and we're gonna have to see where we get with it. The alternative, and it's not really that crazy, is to just like let the built-in views be the built-in views, and then just not mess with them really, and make a new thing that generates, more specific views, and just kind of let them be two separate systems entirely. What gets generated for you and what you use if you're not generating views.
Yeah, the built-in ones have a lot of logic in them to introspect the state of the resource. So, figuring out what strategies are enabled and stuff like that you wouldn't need to do if you're generating the code, because you do that at generation time. You go, okay, this person wants Google and GitHub and password sign in, let's put the right things on the page. And that happens once rather than at runtime, like it's done now.
Yep. Another thing for Ash authentication that's nice is we've got a PR up that is in review, depending on when James gets a chance to review it. But for an Apple, like a built-in Apple authentication strategy, so you can kind of have like a simple one-liner for Apple OAuth, which is nice. And that PR also comes with the visuals for it in the built-in views. So, it's something that you could do without that shell, but it's one of those things that with the pre-built one that kind of helps you do it right and provides the additional options that are necessary, all that sort of stuff. So we want to get that. We'll get that reviewed here soon. Hopefully we'll get it in it. I don't know if James is going to find some problems with it, but we'll see. Cool. Do you have anything else, James, that you want to share? Okay.
No.
Barnabas, what do you got?
Yeah, just mostly using Ash at work, finding some bugs, adding some tests. And today, actually, I got a couple hours where I could work on the subscription stuff. And I think I got now all the blockers out of the way. And I think I should be able to have like an MVP of the feature very soon now.
That is very cool. That's very exciting. So for those who aren't tracking that work, there's Barnabas is doing some work on sort of getting subscriptions built into the resource DSL for Ash GraphQL, so you can model them. And there's actually a lot of like really cool features that are built into it, like applying filters to things that go out, right? Like you have to remind me, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you have those like subscription IDs where that you can add, and we can get the filter that the person has, and then only the query is only run once for like a filter. So if two people have the same filter, it's only run once. So we can use that, and
Mm,
we can have the authentication also use the policy and everything. So yeah.
yeah, very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right, Ricardo, you want to go next?
Yeah, I had a new baby at the beginning of June, so I was a little bit outside of the coding for a couple of months, but now I'm ramping back up, and mostly at work we started a new greenfield project with Ash from day zero. And so and it's a different project from what we are used to do, which is basically API based stuff. This time we started with live view, so I'm experimenting with new parts of Ash which I didn't use before, like Ash Authentication and Ash Authentication and Phoenix. I think I'm going to also show the Ash Float there, because there are some things that ought to be uh, encrypted in the database. So I'm finding trying out stuff that I never tried out in Ash, and having fun with it. So nothing big on my side for now.
Cool. That's really exciting. It's nice to have greenfield work. That always feels good
Uh,
for some period of time, and then it's not
also,
greenfield anymore, and then it doesn't feel good.
yeah, actually, well, the other big project I at work just before my baby was born was we ended basically we had a brownfield project, and we ported the whole backend to Ash. And it took some time, but we ported all of it, and it's open source. So I think that at some point I will link it at least in the Elixir forum. I think there is a thread with all Ash open source Ash projects. So because it's a middle to big size project, it could be interesting to look at.
Very cool. Yeah, I know people would like clamor over each other to see properly shipped to production Ash application. So in chat, Mikolas, I think I got that right. No, Mikolas, right? Anyway, is doing greenfield work and streaming it as a way to learn how to stream and to be accountable. And I've actually seen, I've been meaning to watch one of your streams, but I have just been mega busy this week, unfortunately. But I'll tune in at some point and say hi. All right. Anything else, Ricardo?
No.
Okay. Robert, what you got?
Not a whole lot. I haven't been around much for the last few months. Personal life, and just really focused on my day job, a startup that is built on Ash. So I've been using Ash every day, but I spend most of my time working in LiveView right now, and that's probably because the Ash part is so robust and built out and easy to do that I'm just constantly writing live views and handlers. Yeah, I hope to get more back in. And there's some things that in our app that we'd like to improve. I think compile time is starting to become an issue for us. We don't understand a lot of the compile time issues, and I think Ash is always kind of a little bit of a side eye. Like, is this mostly Ash? So I want to spend some time on that, and I want to get some of the features that we're using in Ash Papertrail up and into the main branch. I was pretty active on that for a while, and we've been just using our own branch with some features that don't really broadly apply to others. But I want to extract some of that and see if I can merge it back in upstream.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, we actually did make a major improvement to compile times recently. In one of the recent Spark releases, we cut down compile times by like more than 50%, I think. And I think I don't know if you've had a chance to upgrade to that or not, but it might be worth looking at because you're not the only person.
Which
Spark 2 point something,
is
I
it
don't
in
know.
Spark?
Yeah.
Usually I try to upgrade almost immediately.
Well, I mean, yeah, in your case, maybe there's maybe not. It's hard to say.
Um, yeah, we're on 2.2.10 on Spark.
That sounds pretty recent. Is that like the newest one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely. When you have some time to take a look at that, grab my ear. We'll see if we can.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do to help out. I know that there's some things that have helped are using DSL fragments to like split up larger resources. Barnabas, did you ever have a chance to do that? Because I know you had one big
No,
resource.
I haven't gotten around to it yet,
Okay.
unfortunately.
We don't have like numbers on it, but by splitting up the resource into DSL fragments, they compile individually, and then they just sort of get like scooped up into the main resource, and you can divide your compile times for large resources in that way.
Yeah, I think some of ours are, and it might be just how we've designed it, but we have really large. Ash has the built-ins for checks and validations. We have our own set of built-ins that we use like in a lot of different places. I think when we import that, it creates a lot of module interdependencies.
Yeah, if you're using
that-
struct pattern matching anywhere in the file where you import, where you pattern match on other resources or pattern match on different things,
Yeah.
then that will cause compile time dependencies for sure. So what my suggestion, I mean, yeah, if you just, importing is nice, but if you don't import, you just like use the module name instead, right? Like the module name and the options, that will break that compile time link. So that can be a way to solve some of those problems. It's just you don't get the fancy syntax of like a function name. Instead, it's like a module name and an ops.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I wish I understood XREF a little bit better. I find XREF to be way too much info, and also like really hard to grok. I kind of want it to be like, well, just the scope here. Like, what are the interconnections just right here? So if I can change this file, like, show me how editing one file results in these files needing to be compiled. Like, explain that to me, and then I can go break those links. But it's hard to really know.
Yeah, there's a really big difficulty there, and Jose has done some writing on this. One of the biggest problems with it is something that's also very difficult to visualize or understand. Really, is they're called transitive compile time dependencies, and what it basically means is like if A depends on if B depends on A at compiled or at runtime, and C depends on B at compile time, then like C has to run B to compile, which means C depends on A at compile time. So you've created a compile time link out of just like a runtime dependency here and a compile time dependency here. It gets really complicated. There is a thing, I think it was Jason Axelson who did it, the depviz, which lets you upgrade or upload a like a dot format export of your XREF chart or whatever, and you can upload it and it gives you like a little chart, like it gives you like a big graph you can play around with. You can like drag files and stuff, and that can sometimes be useful, but it's a lot of info.
I have not found a tool that will parse our dot file.
Oh, really?
It's too big.
Oh my gosh. All right.
And I exported it. I ran it. I downloaded the tools locally and like exported it to PNG. And the largest PNG that it would export everything was so tiny I couldn't read anything. So
yeah.
and it's not that many resources. It's like probably 40 or 50. It's not, an insane number. I think it's just all the connections.
That's surprising to me because I know I've done some big ones, but I mean the other thing is like live views factor in there too, and like pattern matching. We do pattern matching all over the place in live views, and in fact, they really encourage. This is an encouraged pattern in a lot of places that you read, which is like struct pattern matching to get like LSP good features and to like, that's sort of like our type system of sorts. In a lot of cases, but that actually incurs that can incur a compile time issue, which is if you pattern match on a struct in a function head, then in order to compile this function, this module has to compile that other module. So what you've done just for most of the time people aren't even doing it for validation. They're doing it for like design, like clarity, like looking at the code. It's like what a type system is for, right? They're just, this is a user and this is the user's email or whatever, right? And autocomplete and stuff like that, right? But you're actually like tangibly slowing down compiles by doing that, which is why I think it's kind of a dangerous thing to push people to do, is to pattern match on structs.
Yeah. And not that I want to just totally hijack the meeting, but when we get into our authentication code, which is then connected to our router, we end up like recompiling a ton of things in the web part that you wouldn't expect for reasons that I can't understand.
Are you using Ash authentication or no?
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, we are.
So I think
I'm not using any authentication views. We wrote our own views, just the actions.
Could that do it when you use those macros, those like sign-in routes and stuff? Do they introspect the user resource in the router, James?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, so here's what we need to do. We need to
but they might only do it at runtime. I have to double check.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. If they do it at runtime, we implemented for Ash JSON API because we had a similar problem, which is the original implementation of Ash JSON API. We were thinking like, oh, let's make this super fast router where like in the router, it like loops over all of your, but like that has obvious compile time problems, right? If we look at each resource, get its routes out, then it's like your router depends on every file. And then here's where you get to the weird things with, I think it's verified routes or some other Phoenix features. Everything then in turns depends on your router, right? And so it makes these massive cycles. And so
verified routes also. If you have verified routes in your resources, because your resources sometimes generate routes, then you run into it. I think we've removed all the instances of that.
That is
but like
rough,
if you have a user resource that's going to generate like a reset password URL, then your user resource is calling your web.
And
routes.
all of these macros run do their introspection at compile time.
Okay, so so I think it's actually really funny because I think this is the life cycle of every Ash extension is like, let's do stuff at compile time, and then we're like, wait a minute, that causes problems, and then we write like we go back to runtime code. So same thing happened the Absinthe schema is an example of one where doing it at runtime is just not reasonable. But what's okay about it is there's a way to break the compile time link between the router and the GraphQL schema. But what we did for Ash JSON APIs is a similar thing, which is you forward to a router, and that router doesn't have a compile time dependency on the domains. It fetches the domains at runtime, but then it calls into optimized compiled functions on those dynamically fetched domains. So you get a roughly, a fast enough that nobody would ever think to question it router experience with our routes, but there is no compile time link. It is technically dynamic. So I think what we would want to do is the same sort of thing for Ash authentication, which is when you create the user, we would compile or have the user have the end user create this module, or we would do it in the background, a module that's called like user routes or whatever, that the resource.user routes, and then we would do the thing. We can, actually, I would say, Robert, can you open an issue on Ash authentication at least to track that? Like, I can't say anything is going to happen about that soon, but there might be ways. Sure. There might also be ways we might be able to like do something as a short-term solution to clean that up, because I know like that's probably the major link that exists between people's routers and their resources is is that.
Yeah, and I don't even know if that's the source of our issues. I think we have a number of them, and it's just hard once you have a lot of things interacting with each other. It's hard to know. It's hard to know where to start and if you're making progress when you're working on compile time issues. It's really hard to know if you're making progress.
Yep. Yeah. I have to say, working on it from a framework level, you get the kind of flip side problem of I can do things that make it look like I'm making progress, and then in somebody else's app, it's like doesn't help them at all. And it's like it looked great. Like I saw a bunch of progress. Like this demo app got way faster, but then in the real world, it's like no, there's other more complicated things happening. So yeah, it would be nice if there was some kind of like heuristic tool that would just find you like your worst one and just tell you why, right? Like, just 'cause that's all you really want to do is like find one that's really sucking things up and like try to fix it. And that's difficult. It is really quite difficult.
Yeah. And know that you fixed it so that you can then move on to the next one.
Sorry for talking over people. Something that's worth trying, I just had a look, and the Ash Authentication plug that is in Ash Authentication, not in the Phoenix part, that provides the same functionality without Phoenix, does exactly what Zach suggests. It creates a separate router module and then suggests you forward things to it. Might be worth throwing that in to your app and seeing if that breaks that.
Yeah.
That's a quick way of validating that that's part of the problem.
That's interesting because I don't think we use, aside from that, I don't think we use anything in Ash Authentication Phoenix. I think we've ended up rewriting all of it except for the plug.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well then, yeah, maybe you could factor that whole dependency out. I'll tell you what, that would also be really like create the issue just to have something tracking that we want to break these compile time links. But then if you do end up trying that, also post there if that's a reasonable thing. Because when we go about, actually we can tie all of this together, right? So when we go about doing Ash Authentication 5, are we at 5 already?
Yeah.
Okay. When we go about doing Ash Authentication 5 and we have these new generators that will generate the views, we can also have it like, alter your router and generate routes that don't have this compile time problem or something along those lines. So we can basically do this work as part of one big, let's fix that issue, and we can do it all in one go. That'll be for other people. For you might just be able to use the new plug or use the plug that's in Ash Authentication and be good to go.
Something which comes to my mind just because I did it recently with Ash Authentication, but that's totally random. Maybe one dependency that is in your app, but actually calls the web part is if you have the sender and you have the reset link inside, you're using validated routes. I think that's a compile time dependency, maybe. Because I remember that if I remember correctly, when I last used the Mix Phoenix Genoth, I think instead of making the non-web part depend on the web part, they basically pushed down an anonymous function down from the web part to the non-web part that generated the URL.
Yeah, it would be worth looking into that. There's some complexity doing that in a generalized sense, but I think we can look into that sort of thing for like the reason they can do that though is because, well, maybe we could, I think, if you use modules though, that actually should solve that problem. Like a sender module won't be dependent on a compile time. It'll just be called at runtime. So if you just put a sender and then you say put a module in, then I think that's kind of our version of solving that compile time dependency issue, probably. But worth looking into, yeah. Okay. So I think it is time to transition over to community questions. Unless anybody has anything they want to cover. We've got 12 people on, so there should be some questions, right? What do you got for us, folks? We'll we'll wait. And typically when we get to this part of the show, of this experience, I think you'll want to, or if we don't get questions, then we'll just end it early. So you guys are going to keep this going. The viewers are going to be responsible for how long this lasts. Michael S says, even if it's a caveat, mentioning this in the doc somewhere would be great. Yeah, I agree with that. We can I'm wondering, James, what is it the routes, like when you call sign in routes, that does the
Yeah.
Okay. But in Ash authentication,
And
the auth routes.
Yeah.
Can we just
Because
change our guides to tell people not to use, like, can we to tell them not to use the auth routes, but to forward to a plug or something, like to forward to the plug provided by Ash Authentication Phoenix? Because that is Phoenix compatible, or just by Ash Authentication. I mean, that'll solve for half of it, not the
Yeah.
sign-in routes or not the live view routes.
Yeah. That means they don't have a controller for their auth success and failure. They just have a plug, which I think the reason I went with the controller is because people who are using Phoenix will be more familiar with that paradigm.
Yeah, that does actually.
But we can probably come up with a middle ground or something. Like, I think it's definitely doable. All of it's doable. We'll fix it.
Okay. Anyway,
Make it this shit.
we got any questions? All 12 of you, come on.
So while we wait for the question, I just ask, since James mentioned before that Ash authentication generates lots of stuff that maybe it's not obvious and visible. Something we had to re-implement manually, and maybe it's there, is like there is the reset form and or action for when you forget your password, but is there anything ready for like a profile page where you put old password, new password for confirmation, and you change your
Yeah.
password?
Yeah, that's
Pretty sure there is.
I think it's reset password with password. There's an action exposed on the user that you can call. There's no view for it, like no pre-built view.
Isn't there?
Okay.
Is there?
No, I think there is no view because I'm pretty sure I checked them. But maybe it could be a useful addition. Because I'm pretty, there is like a copy pastable example. I don't remember if it's in Ash Authentication Phoenix or in Ash Authentication that basically reuses all the checks. So check the confirmation match, you check for the existing password, etc. So the action you basically copy paste it, and then you just shove a form on it.
Yep, that sounds about right. I think that kind of thing will be a lot easier when we get set up with the generators as well, because that one of those things is like the reason we don't generate that is that it's like you go somewhere else. You go to like your app's homepage and then there's like a profile settings. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not part of that initial experience that we put up in front of your app. And so if we provided it, it would only be like a reusable page or component. It wouldn't be any other thing. But what we could do is basically like, mix Ash Authentication Phoenix.gen. Password reset page or profile page or something, right? And we can do that sort of thing. And I've found this with Ash Phoenix as well. We have the gen.live view stuff. I haven't ported that to use Igniter, but it's actually not that hard to do, like with EEX templates and stuff, like or whatever templating tool you want to use. But the important thing is it's actually pretty straight. I don't know. It just was easier than I thought it was going to be, because like it's the code writing decision points that you make. And when this is kind of the slippery slope of generators that I don't like about them, right? But if it's not right, it doesn't really matter, because the developer will fix it when they're done, right? Like we're giving them a starting point, and they'll say, oh, well, actually, I don't want them to have to confirm their path. Like we don't have to add configuration for must you provide a password confirmation. We can just let them do it or not themselves. And so that's an example of where, like, I think our patterns for the most part have not extended themselves into the UI in such a way that we can have this sort of declarative UI layer following Ash patterns that, or anything like that. We haven't solved that entire half of the app building process, which is fine. And, we're not trying to solve that right now, but, so generating views makes sense to me. I think generating controllers is not great, right? I don't want to generate controllers. I want the controllers that do the logic to be doing it through a library or framework code that will keep everything secure, blah, 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 and like be patchable with security updates and everything like that. So yeah, I think we can look into that sort of thing at that point. Okay, we got some questions. How would you guys implement an API that can be augmented by an AI with new actions / endpoints? That is like an entire Coursera course in one question. I think. Oops, I just knocked this down. So it's hard to give you like an easy answer. But I assume you're going to prompt your AI. Like, I think what folks are saying is like, I think Mikolas was saying in the comments that you can compile code, at runtime. And so ultimately what you do is you'd ask a bot to modify your module, and then you just call, I'm not suggesting this is a great idea, but the way you would do it is you would then call like module.create to redefine a module with the new code from the AI until it like successfully compiles, and then you tell the user like, hey, we did it, we generated, we made your changes to the app. There's a lot of reasons that's not a great idea. Primarily because
So many reasons.
yeah, but look, this is a frontier that people are playing with right now, so we don't want to necessarily discourage it. But the difficulty here that requires a lot of smarts is surviving restarts, because when you redefine a module, it's redefined in memory. It's not saved anywhere. It's not persisted anywhere. I will give you just I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I'll give you a little teaser to go, or a little thread you can pull on, which is that when you redefine a module, or when you define a module using module.create, one of the things that gets returned to you is the bytecode. That bytecode is binary format that can then be, that can be stored in a database in binary format and then loaded at runtime and recompiled at runtime. So if you were to sort of reserve module names for being compiled at runtime, for example, you could, after the user says make an API endpoint that does this, you could compile a module that does that behavior, and then you could store the module name and the bytecode in a database column, and then when you load the app up, you could go fetch all of those and load them all up, and you can actually technically load and like dynamically load and unload if you need to support like a bunch of different users doing the same sort of thing. You can, all that sort of stuff. And that is as much advice as I will provide on that topic. So we've got, when I have an embedded resource, I can just create an Ash form for that embed. Right? Yes, you can create a form for that embed. And in fact, a lot of people do that for things like multi-step forms, or where they're using like you actually don't need to make it an embedded resource to do that. You can just make it a resource without a data layer. Those two things are subtly different. And I would start with the resource without a data layer before I start with the embedded resource. For the case of writing forms, they're the same thing basically though. So yes, you can do that, but try out without even using embeddeds. Just use ash.resource, no data layer. Sola, who has been, I should have been saying names earlier, but talking about the AI stuff, is saying the create action endpoint needs to compile the code, and if it errors, return the errors so the AI can fix the code. Yep, that is true. Which is, I don't know. I probably wouldn't use Ash to write that endpoint personally. You can use Ash to compile the code that they want you to have, but I would just write a regular Phoenix controller or something, or whatever, whose job is to take like instructions from an AI and do whatever thing that you want to do with it is. Just keeps things easier. All right. Any other questions? I'm gonna give you, if we go like 2 or 3 minutes without questions, then we're gonna call it. Actually, what let's see. For me, I need the embeds for the nested array.
I have a
of the
question.
nested array. One second. So you need the embeds for the nested array. So you can have a resource with no data layer have embedded attributes also, but there's no problem with using embeds if you already have an embed and you want to write a form for it. So that's a thing as well. Sula says it will run on a sandbox and serve only one user. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what. In that case, you can do whatever you want. Don't in that case, like it is a much simpler problem. So that can be a lot of fun. Let us know how it goes. Robert says, "What's the latest status on the Ash book?" Okay, that's a good question. So work is going. It's well underway, right? Things are going really well. Rebecca's doing the bulk of the writing. My job is mostly making what happens is Rebecca is touching every part of the framework and finding, a bug here or a thing that's not so great to use there. And so I'm basically just like making the world that Rebecca wants as part of writing the book. It's like, well, it's real smooth right up until this point, and now it's really not smooth. It's not clear. It's not, And so we're actually kind of doing a bit of book-driven development on the framework in general. And through Rebecca and Oliver, who's been in the Discord, you might have seen him around, really, really pushing hard on Ash.json API and the open API stuff. But those two efforts combined have gotten Ash.json API to be much closer to Ash GraphQL. It's still got not quite as customizable, but it actually you can do client code generation off of Ash.json API using the open API specs. The documentation is much cleaner, much nicer. So because the book has, this is I guess the first spoiler we've given on book content, but because the book has a chapter for Ash GraphQL and a chapter for Ash.json API, the deficiencies in Ash.json API were made sort of obvious to Rebecca. And so we've pushed to get that to be in a much better place. So we're still like minimum couple months away. We do have one small announcement, which is we're doing a podcast with Beam Radio. So Rebecca and myself will be appearing on that podcast to talk a bit about Ash and Igniter, and as well as the book. So people will get to hear, I think, from Rebecca. Right now, Rebecca's keeping it a little bit under lock and key in terms of like what's being worked on and that sort of thing. It's still in flight, but I think, check out that podcast if you want to hear more. I have to say, like, as somebody who's read everything that's been written so far, as has James, it's really good. She's doing a really amazing job. And I think it's going to be everything that people have wanted it to be for a long time, which is like, it really does take you through the major pieces of every part of the ecosystem, all the big parts, and give you an understanding of how Ash works and how the pieces work and why they fit together the way that they do. I get excited every time she gives me an update. So, yeah.
And Zach is right about book-driven development. One of my favorite things about watching we have an internal Slack channel for talking about the book, and every now and then Rebecca writes, it would be really nice if there was a command that generated this, and then suddenly Zach comes along and says, I just wrote that generator for you. That way there's a lot less copying and pasting from the book. It's great.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's another factor here, which is the timing is good for the book, because, and I've talked about this other places before, but Ash 3.0, like, there's not going to be significant changes. Like, we have bug fixes, improvements, potentially new, like, smaller options to tweak X and Y, that sort of thing. But it's really, there's no need for major changes to the shape of the system or the way that it works. The Ash core covers what it's meant to cover now. And it didn't before, without bulk actions, without atomics, which again, actually still have, UX issues or like ways that we can improve it to make it cleaner, etc. Right. But the shape of it is there, and it can be done. And that's really critical. And so now that we have that, I think it's a great time for the book to come along, because the things that Rebecca's writing about, if this had been done during Ash 2.0, it would have been out, like, significantly out of date. But we're not going to have that problem. And so I am very excited to see that, and to see, like, that despite we've had more bugs than I wanted to the last, like, I guess 2 months, but it is really is stabilizing, and that's very exciting for me and my ability to sleep at night and etc. Michael S is asking, is Ash SQLite considered pretty much complete? No, not at all.
No. Oh no.
Yeah.
I've been using it in a project, and yeah, it needs some work, my friend.
Yep. The state of Ash SQLite. So there are people using it for what it's worth, right? There are people using it, and they are using it successfully. So it's not like
Oh yeah, it works. It's just not wonderful.
correct. Like Ash Postgres has gotten consecutive years of love, right? And Ash SQLite was copied from Ash Postgres, and minorly altered to support Ash SQL, or to support SQLite on the major pieces. And so it does work, but look at that. Nicolas says that it all good so far using Ash SQLite. Boom. So I don't know what James must be a noob over there having problems.
I've definitely hit some. I've found a place where it created an incorrect migration and did not raise an issue. I just went okay and fixed it and moved on with my life, which was bad, but it was late at night. And a few other things where it would be nice to have bulk updates and stuff working.
Do we not
I
have?
don't.
We don't have update query or destroy query implemented in Ash SQLite?
It looks like it's just looping. So yeah, I just see thousands of queries in my console. So there are things that would be nice we can fix.
That sounds wacky. Okay,
But that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's an intention that like data layers don't have to do everything, and the migration generator is another example of like actually the migration generator is an example of one thing where Postgres really shines, which is that you can do all sorts of nice DDL changes to the tables and to all that other sort of stuff, and it all sort of does the right thing. So, but SQLite, you just can't do most of those things. You can't change types of things. You can't reorder columns in different ways. You can't. There's all these different rules. And the migration generator that we copied into Ash SQLite has no concept of those rules. So it just generates wrong migrations all the time. But, the beauty of that is exactly what you found, which is you just fix them.
At work, just before a couple of months ago, one thing I worked on as a research project is basically we have another project which is using Cassandra/ShilaDB as a database. And I started working on an Ash data layer, basically copying Ash SQLite or Ash Postgres. So it's built on top of Exandra, which is an Ecto driver for Cassandra. So it's still an Ecto-based library, so you can basically reuse what Ash SQL. And I was able to get it to read, update, and create stuff. So the basic things. Of course, being a non-relational database, there are some quirks, but the very interesting stuff is that, for example, in Cassandra, you can't sort or filter on stuff unless it's in the primary key, for example, and being able to express that in the DSL itself, basically saying this is my primary key, this is my partition key, gives you insight and lets you have a nice errors before hitting the database that says, okay, you're trying to filter on something which would not be allowed by the database.
Yeah, that's really cool. If you ever get a chance to make that public, even if it's like we don't have to publish it anywhere, but I think like that is the idea behind Ash SQL that backs Ash Postgres. I don't know if you did it before or after that was created, but Ash SQL is meant to abstract different SQL data layers to some degree. And it works reasonably well. There's actually quite a few things in Ash SQL that are Postgres specific, like JSON-B references and stuff like that like just don't exist anywhere else. But we just, honestly, the state of those things is basically, I can't effectively maintain like 4+ database adapters that are just, query built. And so like what happens is basically we just let people run into an issue and fix it as they find them for those other data layers. There's only so much I can do. And some people are taking initiative though. Like there's I wish I could remember their name. I feel so bad. But there's someone who's been doing a lot of like, shepherding of Ash SQLite as well to make some improvements there. So that's nice. To address a comment in here is talking about, Mikolas is talking about that destroy and update works. What we were talking about is update query and destroy query, which are the callbacks for like bulk destroy and bulk update. And that's not implemented in Ash SQLite, but it is implemented in Ash Postgres.
Jason has asked a couple of times what will be covered in ElixirConf about Ash.
Oh, right.
Maybe just the training.
Why don't I see that? What's going on my screen here? Yeah, so there's the training. We got two things. There's the training and then there's the talk. The training is actually going to be the same training that we've delivered like 3 other times now, which is essentially like an overview style course. We're going to, we kind of start from the very basic and we move on to various topics like adding a GraphQL, and it's mostly focused on things like writing actions and using data layers and these sorts of core things that you really need. So depending on how much it's geared towards folks who may not know much about Ash at all. Although it can be very valuable. Calculations is another big one, right? Like writing calculations and that sort of thing. The talk is 4 years of framework code, which is, I guess, almost 5 years by the time now that ElixirConf is actually rolling around. But it's basically like lessons learned from writing, like just honestly, it's just writing like millions of lines of Elixir at this point. I couldn't really tell you how many lines of Elixir have gone into and out of Ash framework, but write a lot of code. And so I'm just kind of distilling certain design patterns that work when writing the kind of, I don't want to say like all code, but the kind of code that I write, which is this core systems code that runs like, that everybody has, honestly. They try to pretend like they don't have it, right? And maybe the really simple apps don't have it, but you always have your filterer and your paginator and your whatever, right? So anyway, I'm going to be kind of distilling out lessons learned from building Ash thus far. Robert's mentioning who's going to Elixir. Oh wait, Robert, the same Robert that's on this call right now, yeah, I mean, I'm going. I don't know if anybody else is going to ElixirConf US.
Josh?
Not this year.
Oh yeah, Josh. Yeah, well, he's giving the training, and he's giving the training, so he's got to fly like 30 something hours to do it, which is ridiculous. I don't know how he does it.
Barnabas, you gonna make it?
No, not this year.
It's a long trip.
Maybe next year again.
Mm.
Going to Code Team Berlin in October though.
Sounds like fun.
Nice.
I do have to say, I really, really enjoyed ElixirConf EU. And I think that I'm thinking I'd like to go again next year. It was a really good experience, and the food was amazing.
Yeah.
Which is not a compliment I ever have given to a conference ever. I've been to quite a few at this point, and none of them have had good food. And the food at ElixirConf EU was like, I mean,
This is your first EU conference, or?
It was my first EU conference. That is true. So maybe that's just the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite good. And then wherever, I really liked Lisbon. It was really nice. Fun place.
Great city.
Didn't see it enough because I was working the whole time, but that's how it is. Oh, cool. You'll be going next year to ElixirConf EU, Nicolas? I mean, in that case, it'll be great to meet you in person. I don't think we've had the pleasure yet. Okay. All right. Oh, one other thing. I'm gonna send out the certificate, but we have a contributor of the month. which was actually determined quite recently. But Jonathan Manchin, who has a very exciting work that has been done. It's laying the groundwork for a series of features that everybody's been really wanting. And I was actually quite impressed. He dove in and just like began. I don't know. He just did the work and it was great. And he didn't need a lot of help from me. And not only did he do the base work for it, he did a bunch of investigation into what it's going to take in the other packages, and then and kind of set the direction. He's not going to be able to finish all of those pieces, which is very understandable, but he set the direction for how we can do file uploads and this sort of thing in all of our various extensions. So that's very exciting. And I'll be sending, I don't know if he's watching the video, probably not, but I'll send out a little certificate and give him the role of contributor of the month in our Discord server. So something to keep in mind, if you're part of the community, is we do each month hand out 1 or 2 contributor of the month certificates. There's no heuristic, there is no rubric. It's just what I feel like, and it's okay because there's no monetary value in these certificates, so don't worry about it. But we want to show people that we appreciate all of their hard work, and I appreciate the core team, many of which have shown up to this meeting, which I really appreciate. I know that's not always easy for everybody, and I think there's many time zones represented here. So thank you all very much. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch. It's been really awesome. Oh, wow, look at that. You just dialed in. Perfect timing. Well, you check. I'll be sending you a certificate here soon. So congrats on Contributor of the Month. All right. Anybody have any parting words before we pull the plug? All right. We'll see you all next month at the next office hours.
Goodbye.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.